Today is May 15th. It's the DEI subcommittee. We'll start with attendance. We'll go around the room and say who's here. Chloe, we'll start with you.
Oh, hi, I'm here. Oh, should I say my name?
Say your name, yes.
I apologize, really. My name is Chloe Diehouse. I am a 12th grade student at NKHS, and I am here.
Hi, I'm Shivali Finkelstein.
Lauren Beats, Melissa Kambakelsai, Katie Gabriel Black,
I'm James Benz.
Jennifer Lima.
May Lucy, Mary Lowe Presty,
David Alden.
Will Moss.
Jacqueline Lawler.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And Erin Earl is here also. She just stepped out to go.
Sorry, I thought we were doing introductions again.
You're just
Oh, no. It's fine. So the agenda is, the first thing is, bear with me. To approve the minutes from the last meeting, which was on April 10th. Did anybody have any questions on them?
I think I was there, but I'm not listed.
Oh,
Yeah, I was here.
who are you? Okay, I will amend them to include you. That's what happens when. Oh, okay, awesome. So with the amendment, does anybody have any questions other than that? Sorry about that, Melissa.
No, no, thank you.
Can I get a motion to approve with the amendment? Okay. Second? All in favor? All right, awesome. Perfect, so,
Palestine is dividing the left.
so two things on the policy, on the agenda this evening were some things that have come up are,
Already got yours.
oh, okay.
Sorry.
I was like, why am I not here? Okay, thank you.
You're fired, Jen, sorry.
Were, that have
I know
come
where
up
mine is.
over the past year or so, are things having to do with religious holidays, religious-related, events that have happened in the school, and also, accessibility, in terms of district events. So I thought this committee would be a good place to have conversation about those types of things. So, the first one, so in here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, does everybody have a packet of these in front of them?
Yes.
Okay, so there's 4 different packets. One of them is pertaining to religious holidays, and 3 of them are pertaining to accessibility. So I figured the one on religious holidays just has a bunch of different policies from other districts. Our district does not have any policy that relates to religious holidays, religious instruction in the classroom, like religious themes or anything pertaining to religion. And I thought we could just open up the conversation about like what you all have experienced in the schools, like what types of things you have seen, what types of issues may have been encountered. Like obviously like separation of like church and state, we don't teach religion, but there is kind of a cross between teaching about culture but not teaching about religion, and what's the best way to kind of balance those two things. So does anybody want to start the conversation?
I can say, as a teacher, I'm not sure if this goes exactly with what you were wondering about, but accommodations for students that we've made in the past. For our Muslim students, we have provided a place for them to pray during the day, and given them different spaces to go to during lunch when they are fasting for Ramadan and things like that. We've also, it's only come up once for me, but someone who celebrated, and I always say this wrong, Sawaim. It's, I don't know what it's like the Halloweenish, I don't know what the religion is, but they celebrate Samhain around Halloween time, and so that person asked for to be excused from work for that night because they were going to be doing certain religious rites or something, and that was granted to them as well. So we do, if the kids acknowledge it and approach us, we're usually really open to accommodating them. Now I have to look up what the religion is.
I'm Googling it for you.
It's not spelled.
Yeah, that's where I landed. Oh, you do you. You'll do it.
Okay, yes.
So I know, in December, there's a lot of things, especially more like on the elementary school level, that come home, with, candy canes, Christmas trees, like things like that. And, I think maybe for children who maybe are not, who don't celebrate Christmas, like those might be crafts that maybe are not necessarily culturally sensitive. So I'm wondering if people have any comments or thoughts on where that might fall in conversations about this.
Yeah,
Like,
and just to add, just basic, bless you, about, like, it can be both, like, the conversation can be both, because I think to Dave's point of what he just said, like, people are doing things to support students in these areas, but the idea of district-wide policy and procedures is that we'd have consistency in that. And also, like, it wouldn't matter, like, who you talk to or what, like, it would be like, okay, this is what we're doing and whatnot. So it's even hearing about, like, good things that are happening is really helpful, because we'd want to incorporate that, like, for a policy to be implemented district-wide. So
Right.
we're not just looking for, like, we're looking for both sides of
Right.
it, so that we can document the good things that are happening in this space, in addition to making sure that we have some guidance for the administrators, right?
right, absolutely, like the thing with, Ramadan this year, I know that a directive went out, to be supportive of things like that, which
Yep.
is amazing, but I would love to see that
Yep.
as a policy.
Yeah, like that's,
So that a student doesn't feel like they have to ask for it. Some teachers may be super accommodating, and other teachers just might not know, so that way
Yep.
students don't have to feel like
Yep.
they're asking.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just wanna make that clear that, like,
Yeah.
we're looking, like, cause we don't have anything, that we're
Right.
looking to build what,
Yep.
and to formalize some of the things, practices that are currently happening.
Close?
I have two things to say.
Okay.
The first thing I want to say is I agree that having a policy about this is important, and the reason that one of the reasons I think that is, I actually didn't know we didn't have a policy, and I had been incorrectly informed by my peers that we did. I've had many conversations with my peers, and I don't know if any of you, the other students here have had this, but I have distinctly have specific memories of having multiple conversations with peers where they've said things like, I can't believe my teacher scheduled a test for this day. I thought they're not allowed to schedule a test for a day when there's a religious holiday.
Well, I sort of thought that too. So I will name that I have also heard.
Right, like I've
Heard this
heard,
and followed
I've
this
heard,
rule that is
there's
maybe
this,
not a
there's
rule.
this like myth, I suppose, that's gone around that I've heard. I don't know if it's a real thing, that it's just not in a policy, but this is something I've been told, and so I was
Yeah.
surprised that it makes sense that why there have been so many people outraged about there being tests on religious holidays, because it was, I suppose, a misinformation.
I think it's more of it's not a district level policy, but we do say on our calendar that we recognize all, religious faiths, and any student who is requesting accommodation because of a religious observance is entitled to that. So
Right.
it's not a district policy, but it is a practice. Is that how you
Right.
would describe it, Shefali?
Yeah, and also, if we give teachers enough heads up, because they don't always know everything is coming in spite of the fact that things are on the calendar, if we give them enough heads up, they naturally they try not to schedule things around. But one of the things that is in the policy is the excuse absence
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
religion,
Yeah.
Religious attendance. So if we have it, we make sure that it's put in there. So even though there is a test, there is no penalty for them as far as they get 5 days to make up. So we have those things in place, so it's not a separate policy, but to an extent, there is an accommodation
Yeah.
written in the handbook, which helps us out a lot.
To be completely honest with everyone here, I think most of the times I've had these conversations, it has not been with a student who was actually part of the religion but was just hoping to not have a test. You know what I mean? And so my interest in having a policy is mostly to clarify that, so that these conversations, does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
also
all done in
though,
high school.
yeah, and also students that might be affected by it there's that, and then there's also students that might not talk about it because they don't want to say like, oh, I need this thing, or my family's different, or we celebrate something that other people, there's a lot of layers there too. So I think it's also, the other side of it too is just that clarity really helps. I like that word that you use, Chloe, because that way, students don't have to like raise their hand and say, hey, I need this, or hey, this is this, like, because students in high school don't want to do that either, or elementary school or middle school, so I like that word, clarify.
Sorry to talk again. This is my second thing I want to say. You said about the like Christmas crafts and stuff in elementary school, and I just wanted to say that like having recently been in elementary school, and some of my like best memories from elementary school were doing crafts like that. But I think that like it's a wonderful part of like school, even through middle school I was doing things like that. But I think that it's important that we think about the way we present crafts like that. Like for me at least, I have a strong memory of like we did crafts for like other holidays. Like we would do like a Hanukkah craft, and we would do a Christmas craft. But the Christmas craft was like make a Christmas card to give to your family, or make this ornament to hang on your tree. Whereas the Hanukkah craft was like, let's learn what is Hanukkah.
Right.
Does that make sense? And so I think that like the important thing would be to create the more common holidays, quote unquote, in terms of celebration within our school department, and present them all in the same way, as opposed to have some be like, let's learn about something different, whereas the other holidays are like, let's celebrate what we all know. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I think like what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, like one is presented as the default and one is presented
Right.
as an other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of assumed that you celebrate, we'll say Christmas, right? In that like take this ornament home that you made and put it on your tree. Whereas for other holidays, it's like, let's cut and paste parts, like the candles on the menorah, and now we can learn about what that means.
Right.
It's assumed that you know what one thing means but not the other thing.
Yeah, and those actually aren't the only two religions in the world either.
Right, it's
so-
just an example that happens at a similar time.
Right, right. Another thing that I think is important to discuss is like scheduling. I think, we always have the conversation about, which religious holidays, are scheduled days off from school, and, recognizing that you can't take every day off. But I think it's important, to have an understanding, within the district of trying to avoid scheduling, like important, like parent-teacher nights, or like the school science fair, or things like that. Avoid scheduling those on, some of the traditional, like important religious holidays for the ones that are observed in our community. Like that way parents aren't forced to choose between school events and religious holidays. That's just something we don't currently have anything that.
We have a practice of trying to do it, but we don't have a policy.
Right, we don't have a policy, right.
Jen, was there a discussion of, I guess I was not at the last meeting, so was there something that prompted this, or was it just,
It's
Let's
been,
just-
there have been over the year within the school, there have been things that have popped up that have been issues within the district, and I think this is a good committee to kind of discuss those types of issues before having the school committee make any type of action around a policy.
Were there issues with like how those things were handled, or was it sort of like they came up, they were handled appropriately, and then everyone moved on, kind of?
I would say both, maybe?
Okay.
Yeah. And I think also there is some, in some instances, it's more of, kind of like Erin said, like some places are handling it super well and being super proactive about like going out of their way to, be accommodating and inclusive. And then other instances, it's maybe just not knowing, and so it to be able to provide a template and just some awareness for everybody to kind of know what is appropriate and what's not, and to give guidance on the best way to handle this.
I would say there's lots of micro examples that we've, and some have been, community members have emailed the school committee, some are things that we've observed, some are things that, have been brought to the superintendent's attention, so it's not, and again, I think it's just that piece of, especially to make sure that we're being, like I said, consistent across the schools, but then also for a family coming into our community, maybe they're looking at lots of different places and maybe they're looking for hey, if my family, this is important to my family, XYZ, having a document to say what we value, that we are gonna meet people where they are and that we're gonna do the best to serve students. So I think it's a piece of that too. So it's not one big thing happened and now we need this policy. It's more just it seems like a gap in what we have and other school districts have it. And I think it opens us up for some potential future challenge too of not having something to point to for families and then also students and administrators, so.
Right, and I think the point, for me anyways, the point is not to say we're not going to acknowledge religion, we're not gonna discuss it, we're not gonna show it, it's just to say if we're going, in those instances where we are having the conversations or we are celebrating it, we just wanna make sure that we're being inclusive and recognizing that it's not everybody in our district is celebrating the same holidays in their families, and just to make sure that children are not sitting in a classroom and saying, that's not what's happening in my house, what's the matter with me? Just to provide for that, to try to avoid that to the extent possible. And I'm just curious, what, especially for the students, have they experienced, have they seen anything that they think would be helpful to make that less likely to happen? Even in terms of the holiday concerts, the songs, things like that, crazy Christmas sweaters, things like that. I know it's hard because we are a predominantly Christian community, but just to be.
Well, I would say the United States educational system has been based.
Right.
I wouldn't say we don't know your state, it's based in that, right? Winter break is when winter break is for because Christmas, so it's kind of coupling that piece of it is that we've been set, this system has been based around Catholicism, right? Yeah. As far as schedules and calendars and things like that, and so I think that's a tricky part of it is trying to decouple that, right? I always use the example of we have school on Rosh Hashanah in Rhode Island, but if we had school on Christmas, that's not what people are used to, right? If we just said, okay, we're not gonna take any days off for holidays, and therefore we're gonna have Christmas on December 25th, that's not what this part of our country at least is used to.
Yeah. And I'll just also, we had school on Good Friday this year, and in DMS there were 500,000 children absent.
Yeah.
And 700,000 teachers, I was absent. So, I would like to name that I do not wanna be on the committee that kills the ugly sweater competition.
I love playing sleigh ride.
If that's where we land, I will walk out. Because I don't think in our discussion of this policy, which I think is extraordinarily important, I would lean toward more, different than no Christmas trees, no ugly sweaters, no holiday concerts. I don't think it'll be received well if that's where we land. And B, it just doesn't seem like the point. It feels I was thinking about this in terms of race on my way in, and sometimes it feels like an easy answer to be well, we're just gonna not talk about it. We're gonna ban the conversation, don't do it, and it feels not productive. So I think, if we're talking about religious policies, I think we need to talk about an attendance policy for students and potentially even, educators, staff.
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk about, major things like tests and shows, but it's also, I think the language needs to be sort of make best, try our best, because it's hard to not schedule anything around everything. It's just a challenging task, I think, to take everyone into consideration all the time. So I think everyone just needs to try their best as best they can.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And then I hate to bring up the word dress code because but, you know, also things like dress code, like what students are allowed to be wearing as they go about their day. I think that's important to protect, from a religious perspective.
We're working on the dress code at the school committee level right now, so that won't be an issue.
It's hard, no one likes that job, sorry.
But that's an important
Yeah,
reminder
yeah.
though about that piece.
No, and I agree with you, more is better, like, I don't want to restrict, I wanna make sure that, like, sitting next to Santa Claus is, you know, 5 other things, like, I wanna make
Right.
sure that, you know, kids love a holiday, teachers love a holiday, like, holidays are amazing, I just wanna make sure that the holidays are not limited.
Yeah.
And that we remember that just because this holiday is ours or mine, that this holiday might be yours, and we're including all of them.
Totally.
And I think, it's, in terms of tests, quizzes, and scheduling, I think is important to have that reminder of, you know, you're right, like, there's however many religions there are in the world, and we can't have every single holiday off, but I think to have a policy that says, like, even at, like, when we schedule, like, school committee meetings, or, like, it is a practice to avoid scheduling them on, you know, whatever the high holy days are for each religion, like, to
Right.
avoid those, you know. It just, I think it's courtesy, because, like, we wouldn't schedule anything on Christmas, so we shouldn't schedule anything on, you know, Passover, like, so it's just,
Right.
you know,
The Highline Public Schools guidance in here is pretty interesting.
which one?
Yeah, the
top-
highlight,
highlight
yeah, I was
starting
looking
on
at that one
page
too.
5. It's very thorough and inclusive and expansive, I would say.
Which one, Dave?
Starting on
It's
page
the one,
5.
yeah, this one.
The religious related activities and practices. It
That
goes
one.
through a lot to say just what is appropriate and what would turn something from being appropriate to religious, or trying to inculcate or something like that, a person.
Yeah, like it uses language like further, staff is encouraged to balance such displays, you know, with symbols commemorating other traditions of the season, you know, like it has a lot of things like that in it, which is interesting.
Like, can holidays be recognized at school? Holiday can have both religious and non-religious cultural significance. And activities including instruction, parties, and decorations must not have the purpose of affecting or promoting or inhibiting religion. It goes on to say, that, for example, you wouldn't necessarily put a cross up in a public school. However, it could be used as an instructional, like, you could have one as representative to show the kids, like, this is the Christian cross, this is the Star of David, this is the menorah, like, but we wouldn't put a menorah out for display necessarily for the whole community. Yeah, it goes through quite a bit. And it seems like it was written in 1984, which seems really, really progressive.
The other thing I think I read somewhere in some policy was like, you don't just have to teach about holidays in December, like, we can teach about holidays year round. Like,
So Jen, when Jacqueline brought up about the Good Friday, that's the one that comes to mind for me. And just like with the caveat, I'm speaking from like a Catholic Christian perspective, is somebody who does celebrate, like, it's not just a day off, it's a day that our family celebrates. And I don't remember exactly when this was, and I presume it still comes up. So students made it be, exempt from doing, being in school, still have to make up their work. But then this could also extend to sports. So if that student isn't going to school and there's an essential sports practice that day, or a competition and they're not there, then are they exempt from that? Or like sometimes for some sports, if you're not there for
That's
practice,
actually a great question,
then you
yeah.
can't participate in the
Yeah.
next competition. So
Yeah.
I'm just thinking
Or if
that
you're not at
maybe-
school, you can't be at practice
Right.
too.
yeah, something,
Yeah.
so there may be further repercussions, but again, like Jacqueline said, like, you wanna be able to acknowledge, but how many, how many of the holidays do you acknowledge? And I don't know if North Kingstown even keeps any data on that. Like there may have been a lot of people, you know, who didn't go to school in DMS. Are people just taking the day off because?
Yeah, word got around that like some kids weren't gonna be there, and then everyone was like, I too will not be there.
I mean,
Yeah.
I just wonder, because I see numbers, you know, we've got a pretty fairly active parish, but I know just in general, like with sacraments, again, I don't wanna like infuse this, but it's just the reality. There are like half the number of kids who celebrated First Communion this year versus when my kids, so are people really like celebrating, or is it just, I wanna take a day off?
Well, I mean, and that's the
And
thing,
you can't-
we can't be
you
like,
can't,
okay, so
yeah.
you took the day off, could you please bring me a note from your priest that you actually went to church?
Yeah, no,
Like, you can't do that, you know?
No, so I'm saying, like, would people just, like, sort of jump on it because, oh, it's a day off?
Right.
And then it sort of gives the appearance that we need to have, like, multiple holidays.
Right, I
off.
think it comes to, like, the thought process, I know for me anyways, in approving the calendar was religious holidays don't have a place on the school calendar, because it's very difficult to say, we're going to do this one and we're not going to do that one. So rather than approving some versus others, it was better to do none. So that's why for me, I voted for a calendar that did not have Good Friday on it, understanding that students and teachers could take the day as a excused day because of religious holidays.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was it the state calendar this year as well?
The
Just
state
mirrored
calendar, the state calendar doesn't do any religious
Yeah, it doesn't do
holidays.
any
Right,
religious
well, that's what
holidays.
we adopted this past year, right?
Correct,
We adopted
yeah.
the state calendar,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, we edited it a bit. It's not
It
carbon
wasn't exact.
copy, because our PD days have to fall it's not an exact copy, but we followed it
We followed
as
it
much
for
as
the most
possible.
part,
That's
yeah.
our goal, is to
Yeah.
follow it as much as possible.
Because we didn't do any of the Jewish holidays, we didn't do any of the other holidays, so, you know, Christmas is winter break, you know, and I think what stood out about Good Friday this year versus other calendars is that last year, it was able to be kind of tucked into the April
April break,
vacation,
yeah.
and so this year it stood by itself, so it was kind of clear that it was not part of April vacation. But I think that's a very good point about the, if you are excusing your child for religious reasons, then they do, in theory, suffer repercussions because of the sports. Like, and that I think is something that should be delved into, because if you do miss school, you can't participate in sports, but they shouldn't be penalized because of their religion. So that is something that should be considered, I think.
I've had things like that. Like last year, I think allowing students to be excused from school is really good, because in other schools that I've been to, they've had nothing like that at all. So, but for sports, on Yom Kippur last year, I had a football game, and I didn't know what to do because I had to fast, so I ended up having to go, but they wouldn't allow me to play. So there are like certain things like that it's just like it's really hard to like gauge like what you should do for that. So I think things like that are tough, and I think like especially for sports, stuff like that needs to be excused rather than just not allowing that kid to play.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I ever, like, put that connection together, like, that if you are out for a religious reason that you're, because my kids are not religious, so like, we've never run into that, and that's a great example of how if something doesn't affect you, like, you don't realize it's an
Yeah.
issue, so I appreciate that being brought, up.
Going
Yeah.
along with the food choices too, thinking about school lunches, and if there, like there are definitely, I think, some things I was thinking about like that as far as for certain, we brought fasting from a couple different angles, but then also like there's definitely, I think, some pieces there, and so, again, being at least aware and cognizant, and then if possible, you can work around it, like that I think is a kind thing to do. So like, for example, I know some religions don't eat meat on Fridays. So like, is there a way that you can be inclusive with those meals and just have an option for everyone that doesn't include whatever, like something like that is something we could consider as well.
I was gonna say, if this committee could, I don't know if this is the work of this committee, or part of the policy or whatever we put together, can have like a nice table with all the possible religious holidays for every year, right? That would be really helpful, because a lot of times school year starts and then things just happen to us, and we are all always trying to be 1 hour ahead in our lives, and having that information to the staff in September would be really, really helpful.
I would say before September, because I would imagine they plan for their, like, you know, like they're planning for the fall probably prior to September, right? When they're thinking about their tests and when they're thinking about.
They're not doing that in the summer though.
Open houses and things like that.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, like there's some
It would
planning.
really help.
Yeah.
Having it on a calendar
Yeah.
is one thing, but just having like a nice little
List.
table of all
Absolutely.
possible things that can happen.
Yeah.
There, I remember we used to have, you know, Christmas, Hanukkah, and now over the last few years we have had it Kwanzaa, and I'm sure there's other parts of celebration that happen in different parts of the world that you don't know about, but it would be a nice cool little project, maybe a senior project someone can do for our committee to put together research.
Yeah, there's a great calendar. I always, like when I'm scheduling stuff, I always use it because it's a good like interfaith, like diversity calendar that we could use to get stuff from.
Especially the fasting holidays, like the fasting holidays impact us in school and teachers, and knowing like which kids are fasting is really important.
Yeah.
How do you all get that information right now from students?
And like where we are, we just kind of have a strong network, I think, of people looking out. So, you know, we'll get, you know, hey, just so you know, this kid's gonna be fasting, I'm gonna send an email to these 4 teachers who they have. So it's like, it's very much, you know, grassroots community based, which is great, but like you said, not systemic.
And if we've had legacy students,
Yeah.
students coming up who had older siblings in the schools.
Yeah. So it sounds like an opportunity where we could maybe, in a good way, formalize something for, so that it doesn't feel like you have to, you know, find the right teacher or find, you know, like there could be some opportunity there for being able to communicate those things of, hey, this is important to our family, this is how we observe it, we want you to be aware. Kind of like some sort of way to get that information, not grassrootsy maybe. What? Oh, I didn't know if you had like a add-on or a pushback on it, yeah.
No. We did get an email from administration asking us at certain times of the year if we knew of any students.
Yeah.
And it went out to the whole faculty, so if one person had a connection, they could say, yes, I know about this child, and it would spread to, the administration would alert the other staff members that work with that child. If we had, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
If we have new families enrolling in the district, it might be on like a, what would you like us to know about you, any special holidays or something like that type of form?
Yeah, and there are a few touch points, like our MLL teacher, you know, interfaces with a lot of kids who are from different cultures, so that's always a good touch point to check in with like those people. But again, that's more like informal. And just in terms of like intersectionality on the calendar issue, just to name that, I think that the state calendar is in many ways like addressing equity issues when it comes to like if you have kids in different districts, kids going to different schools, like when everyone follows more or less the state calendar, I think that's helpful to a lot of parents, and especially parents without like support systems, to, you know, run and get this kid or run and get that kid. So when you're thinking about the calendar, while we're thinking about religious holidays, which is great, just like, we don't wanna mess it up too much, I would think, and not deviate too much from the state calendar, which I think is a good baseline for everyone to kind of follow. That's my 2 cents.
I think we did, for the most
Yeah,
part.
I didn't see much
Yeah.
difference at all, I don't know what it was, PDDs or whatever,
Yeah.
but nothing too crazy.
I think the administration has also been very respectful of acknowledging the special holidays that people celebrate and giving them that time. So having no holidays on the calendar, but letting people know you can still take the time if this is what you celebrate, that's important.
How is that communicated?
I believe it's in our contract for religious observances.
In your teacher contract?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have that, and I think you actually came up with it, Jane, where we changed the calendar like 2 years ago, like where we say at the bottom, like, we respect all faith observances and, you know, if you don't see yours listed, like, let us know and, you know,
Definitely doesn't say that.
what?
It doesn't say that.
So something like much more eloquently than what I just
Oh,
said.
yeah, I know that, but I don't even know if it says that other part about like let us know part.
I think so. Let us know if we missed, cause we want to,
It says something, hold on.
something like that, yeah, at the bottom of the calendar.
Acknowledges and supports all of its members in their faith beliefs. For those who notify the school of holiday observance, absences are excused for school day and extracurricular activities. Students will be allowed a reasonable amount of time to reschedule any assessments, homework, or project deadlines with their teachers.
Okay, so it doesn't say tell us if we
Yeah.
missed something.
Yeah.
Something else must do that.
I think the other piece of it too is being really thoughtful about how we talk about staff too. So like for staff, if they need to take a day, like they have to take their personal time, whereas other people,
I don't think we
No,
do.
There's one.
We don't.
what do you do, what would you do?
For faculty, I don't know about like others, but like teachers, there's two sections. There's like personal days and there's religious observance days.
Alright, and they're not counted the same?
They're not kind of the same. I did
Okay.
take a personal day because, you know, whatever, but I don't think I had to
No,
take a personal day.
certainly not.
Yeah, and then we're incorporating that
Yeah.
into the GCB, cause we copied it right from the teacher's contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something else I read wasn't consistent with that, so we can check it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Things we're doing well, things we could do better?
Other places, like other organizations, companies, things that you've seen well?
Chloe?
I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that my teachers have done a really great job of being inclusive of other holidays. I can't remember who mentioned it, but someone said something about the holiday concert at the high school, and obviously I was raised in a family that celebrates Christmas, so my experience might not be representative of everyone's, but I think Miss Silvera does a really incredible job in being inclusive. The holiday concert is pretty much smack dab in the middle between Hanukkah and Christmas, and we have one half of the auditorium is all, paper, blue and white Hanukkah decorations, and the other is Christmas decorations, and we always have songs that are from both holidays, so I do think that that is pretty inclusive.
Good.
So
That wasn't a
for-
knock on Tony, just so you know, like, that was not.
I was not being defensive of
Okay.
Miss Silvera, I was trying to celebrate her. She is an amazing teacher.
I think too though, there's more than just 2 holidays that happen in that season, and so that's piece of it, like, that is great, and and definitely progress, but I think, just to acknowledge too, that
Yeah.
there's a little bit more there.
It just happens to be right in between those two, and
Yeah.
I think within the high school, by far, those 2 holidays are the most widely celebrated in that time, and so I think, but it's definitely more inclusive than it could be, I don't know if 20 years ago we were having both in the same way. I'm sorry, now I feel like I said something wrong.
Oh, no. No, I'm just saying, like, I think it's important though to like, yes, that is progress, but there probably are students that is not inclusive enough, probably. That's all. So it's
She
not,
was Wiccan.
huh?
Charlene was Wiccan.
That took a long time.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
There you go.
Also,
No, sorry.
From the quid perspective, my kids come home practicing the generic winter songs about hot chocolate and snow and stuff like that, and then there's I think there was one song with the menorah, and then there were some of the more traditional deck the halls that are associated with Christmas but they have the mix. I don't know how, they seem to have been rehearsing more songs than they actually perform, which I am not
I don't know, that
celebrating
concert's long.
more. But, they have the mix, so I'm like, oh, it's Pretty cool, I like the hot chocolate songs.
I think too, like growing up in a family that celebrates Christmas, you just associate winter songs as Christmas songs. It's like Dashing Through the Snow, Christmas song.
Right.
Not really.
Yeah.
So like those of us that celebrate Christmas might be like, there's so many Christmas songs, like 2 Hanukkah songs and like 1 other song, and it's like, well actually, like, so it might be more inclusive than we think too, potentially.
Yeah, like Frosty's probably not a Christmas song.
Right.
The hot chocolate songs.
That's what,
a
I
Christmas
was
song.
gonna say that earlier, how like.
It's a Polar Express song.
Frosty's does.
So, you're heading to Christmas with that one, sorry.
Unfortunately, I didn't know that.
True story, good movie.
Dance moves.
I just wanted to agree with what May said, that I really think that's true, that like a lot of things we typically associate with Christians aren't necessarily super Christmassy. Like I've seen often around when the winter holidays, like teachers will put up like snowflake decorations and stuff, and that's actually kind of just like generally winter festive, you know what I mean? And so I think that's kind of a wonderful way to be festive without being like, you know, in the cradle and stuff.
I will say that the hallway here was decorated with Christian icon stuff at Christmas this past year, and that stood out to me, so it needs to be everywhere. What?
Yeah, what was?
Oh, I mean, it was like Santa, and it was Christmas themed in that hallway.
Specifically, I don't think it's that way.
Yeah, I taught in New York for 10 years, and in New York, which is very diverse, obviously, and I taught in Brooklyn. Yeah, we, as teachers, we were not allowed to have any religious decorations at all. It had to be all just universal, like snowflakes, and that was fine, and actually it worked well. Nobody ever complained, but we did make a lot of accommodations for students, and that worked out really well, and teachers, you know, just really got to know their students. Most students were really good about self-advocating for themselves, but of course not always. Students are gonna advocate, so yeah, to have some sort of way to either reach out to parents or, you know, if the students are older, you know, in the beginning of the year, just to make sure we can accommodate students with that, but no one ever complained about not having decoration, like they were always universal, and that's just the way New York does it, just because there's just such a vast amount of, you know, religions, but not one complaint.
So nobody was like, where's Santa, or like,
Never.
where's Rudolph, where's,
Never.
yeah.
Where's Norm's with you?
Is there a way at the, like, I guess more for the older kids, I have a kindergartner, so, but like more for the older kids, like at the beginning of the year to be like your question, like if you have any religious holidays or needs across the year, like let us know now, rather than being like, we're gonna assume it's Christmas and Easter and you just let us know, like catch us somewhere if it's not, rather than like feel like you have to like out yourself every year to every teacher like along the way.
I do think, and I'm trying to remember because I have a kindergartner too. I don't think they're in the same class though.
Oh, okay.
That seems cool. But I do feel like I filled out something for my kindergartner's class,
Okay.
like when they were coming in. Like I feel like it was on something.
Yeah,
But I don't think it goes with the student. Like I think, you know, so I think it's every year, like you're saying, like every year you need to refill that out. Or like when they transition schools, or like, you know, maybe they know about my kindergartner because of my third grader, but like then so that's where I think the piece is missing, is like having to re-educate as you go through our system. Because I do feel like I remember filling out something. Maybe it was in pre-K, I don't know. But
Like what, tell me, like
yeah, it was
what
like,
holidays do you celebrate, or
like
all
my
that
kids,
paperwork
like,
you do?
yeah, it was one of the 9,000 pieces of paper.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was for the district. I don't think it was the daycare.
I know I did one
Yeah.
for like my son's daycare, which was like, let us know of any special holidays, like if they're not, they worded it better than this, but if they're not the typical holidays and you wanna come in and like teach the class about like something, let us know, which you can't do, and it's a different thing, but,
Yeah.
but there was something like that at daycare too, but.
Could that go in Aspen, or is that like illegal? Right, like it is, like, can we document students' religious beliefs in Aspen? Be like, we have their
We
race
wanted to
somewhere.
share, I think.
Well, like, cause that would follow the student, to your point.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider for the policies and procedures as we work through things. And again, this committee doesn't have to solve all the things, it's just, it can eventually, right, Jen, make a recommendation to the school committee, and then the school committee could defer it to the administration or a policy subcommittee, you know, like, it's more just having this committee give some recommendations from a DEI lens of what could be good for the district, and then other committees and groups have to work through all those nuances. So that's just something that we could bring up as this committee is like, hey, like thinking about how to make it so a student doesn't have to say something every single year to a teacher. Like similar to your preferred name or similar to whatever.
Yeah.
But also, I don't think that just because a student's been assigned a religious identification at a young age means they're gonna have the same identification when they're 16 or so. It
No, it could be
might have
something
to
they could
check
check, it could be something they could check in Aspen every year, or have to update in Aspen, who knows? You know, like, I agree, it could very much change and whatnot, just like your preferred name, or just like your pronouns, or just like whatever, yeah. I just think, I know I didn't put it, I know I handwrote it, there's no doubt in my mind.
I just think having every student do it too, like the students that were out for Good Friday, like put Good Friday as one, like a holiday that you're gonna be out for or whatever, like include everything rather than just being like, alright, we'll assume Christian unless told otherwise.
Yeah, I like that better than tell me something that's, if it's other than.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean, like I wanna
You'll
hear from
default to
everybody,
Christian,
right,
you
right,
know?
right, yeah.
I like the idea of having people say like what special holidays they celebrate at the beginning of the year instead of like going up to the teacher, because sometimes it's hard to ask, because if everybody around you is Christian and you're Jewish and you have to go up to that teacher and be like, hey, I'm different, I celebrate Hanukkah, it could be really difficult. So like saying it at the beginning of the year, I think would really help.
Yeah.
Just like keep it more like widespread. for
And making
everybody.
everyone do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other one thing.
Yeah, like what Chloe said earlier about the like how things are presented too, like that part where you were saying like it's not like, oh, we're all gonna make an ornament and let's learn about Hanukkah, like that was really, I thought that was a really good point that you made earlier that's connected to what you just said.
As students on that first week of school, do you feel barraged by your teachers asking you the same questions, like your name that you'd like to be called, your pronouns and things like that? Is that like too much, and if it was just in one place beforehand, would that be better?
I mean, sometimes it can get like a little, feel like it's too much, but in the end you have to realize that they're doing it to like help you and accommodate you, to like figure out who you are, so that they could like help you and all that.
I like the idea of having it centralized in all one place, but I think we would have to make sure that it was something that students would actually fill out if it included other things like name and pronouns and whatever, or sorry, not whatever, but all those other things, because I know that every year when I first need to ask for Tylenol at the nurse's office, I find out that my mother has not yet filled out the medicine form. You know what I mean? And my mom's like really on it with things, so like I can imagine that there would be like a lot of unfilled out forms. You know what I mean?
Lydia gets outed.
And so like I would rather be like asked by every teacher so that they would actually know what the correct information was than have teachers just not know because the system didn't account for the fact that people might not fill it out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's tricky though, because it would also have to be somewhat confidential to the child if they're identifying one way at school but not comfortable at home or outside of that community. Yeah.
I've also noticed that kids lie a lot, like they don't tell the truth on those things, especially boys in high school. They like to make jokes about it, so it's really tough to take it seriously sometimes, you know?
Well, then that speaks to me about the tone and the culture in that classroom, like it's something's not being established in the classroom, that it's not okay to make jokes, and laugh about that kind of thing. So that's like a culture, a tone thing in the classroom that needs to be addressed, I think.
And hopefully the teacher is able to identify those who are being jokesters.
Too many of them.
Too many.
It's all of them.
I also think like whenever whenever I'm writing a policy or writing a procedure or whatever, I always write it for the students that need it, not the students that will abuse it. Like I always try to focus on like that piece, and then, you know, like whatever happens, happens, but like I'd rather go for the students that need it, and then you just have to kind of deal with the jokesters or whatever, you know, so, and then like to your point, like build on the culture and try to educate, so I always try to look at it in that view, because if not, my head always gets like, how do we, like, work around all these things, and like.
It's a process, it's not
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
day thing,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, I agree.
Which level did you teach in Brooklyn?
I taught high school.
High school.
Mhm.
So, what I'd like to ask, unless anybody has anything else they wanna say, is that everybody kind of, like, think about what we talked about, kind of take some time to go through these, and then before the next meeting, send me your thoughts on anything that you think you would want to see or absolutely not want to see in a policy. And then before the next meeting, I'll try and put like a draft policy together for us to talk about at the next meeting. Does that sound?
Because it's not, because all this committee has to do is make a recommendation, it doesn't have to technically
Well, that's
write
what I
the
mean,
policy.
like just
Yeah.
like thoughts.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And then we can talk about it
Yeah.
as a recommendation.
Yeah, yeah.
Cause I don't wanna recommend anything out of here that we haven't agreed should be in or not in. And then we can discuss it, cause this is like, 22 pages, and there could be 3 things in here that people are like, yeah, those are the things that I think we should absolutely consider, or people might be like, nope, I don't think we need any of this. Or there could be stuff in here that, or stuff that's not in here that people think are important.
It might be interesting too to check, like, Rhode Island laws and, like, you know, like lawsuits that have got, I noticed that a couple of these documents reference some lawsuits, like some
Yep.
so-and-so versus so-and-so's. And so there might be some things in Rhode Island that we need to be aware of too. And then also thinking about like First Amendment rights and things, like, you know, there's a couple pieces there that we should probably check too, cause there's some crossover, I think.
Okay, anybody have anything else on this subject?
It's been a minute since I've been in high school, but, for the, like, you were talking about Aspen and like things that, if you were to fill out a form or something indicating your religion or what holidays you may need off or whatever, is, like, for middle school and elementary school where you're staying essentially with one teacher, that would be pretty self-explanatory, but for high school, is it possible that there would be like a homeroom teacher that would get that information? Whereas like name and pronoun is a pretty immediate, like you're gonna need to, every teacher that you see that day is gonna need to catch up to that. But with religious holidays, you have a little more leeway. Ideally, it's not the second day of school. So is there like a homeroom teacher that, like, homeroom teachers are assigned, giving all the other teachers of the unit or whatever, the religious holidays or preferences of each student? Is that?
High school, there's an advisor for,
Okay.
like the student has an advisor for the same 4 years.
Okay.
I'm not sure about at the middle school.
Yeah, we have like, now we're, well, at DMS now we're doing like this PLT business, which is great,
Mhm.
but it's like for each year.
They start with us each day,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't loop with them from year to year to year, like the high school does.
I'm not sure about Bigfoot, what they do.
Bigfoot?
Yeah. Do they do like a PLT there?
They have something, I'm trying to think what it is. Is it quiet reading time or something, it's called reading
Dear
time,
time.
quiet time or something like that?
I was
I want quiet reading
only there for first
Quiet
period,
reading
so-
time or something.
I love quiet reading time. I tell my boss. You're like, we're gonna do 30 minutes, no one talk to me.
I do think having, I understand what you're saying, Chloe, about, no, sorry, I shouldn't. About, you know, people potentially not updating Aspen, but I really like the feature in Aspen, especially with the pronouns, it has worked really well. And it really helps with the student confidentiality piece. So, you know, what you were saying about advisory teachers, you know, sharing information with the other teachers. As a principal, I would be a little concerned about that, only because I worry about the confidentiality and then who
Yeah.
didn't really want something communicated that got communicated. So I would prefer if we like encourage, maybe we can have time set up during advisory to say, all right, every Monday of every month, everybody gets on Aspen, checks everything and makes sure everything is updated. So if we build that as a system, now we have a system that everybody has equal access to, we are preserving confidentiality, but then we have this wealth of information that people need to know.
Awesome. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was accessibility at student events, and district events. We don't have a policy that covers this, and something had been brought up to me last year about students in our district who might require assistance to get to certain events, perhaps not being able to attend because they use wheelchairs, and parents of students maybe having some issues attending district events because of difficult getting into buildings. All of our buildings obviously have to have, accessible entrances and things like that, but just because it's accessible doesn't mean that it's easy to get into. And, not just in terms of like wheelchair accessibility, but, our school committee meetings, just as an example, like are not, I have a friend who's deaf. She can't come to the meetings because she can't hear, obviously, and there's no ASL interpreter. And the Google Translate for the captions is not good. So like things like that, and like how do we make our website more accessible so that people can use it? And so how can we make our events accessible so that students and parents don't need to ask, am I going to be able to get to this event? Am I going to be able to come see my student? And what are the best practices for that? I couldn't really find anything for schools, but I did find things on event planning that kind of I thought were somewhat suitable. And I just thought we could kind of, talk through these. Have you all seen this at your schools, or have you experienced this? Are there things that you might have at your workplace that you're already doing that, we might be able to incorporate here? What type of changes can we make so that our district is more accessible for the people who are a part of it?
So Jen, when you say there's no interpreter, does that,
Well, we have to provide one if asked,
okay,
but like as a general rule, you have to ask for it.
correct,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we're complying with all legal requirements.
Oh,
I just
okay.
wanna put that out on the table, but
I
yeah.
was just, I didn't know
Yeah.
when you said there wasn't one and if it was an availability
Yeah, no,
issue.
if
Okay.
asked,
Oh.
48-hour notice and,
Yeah.
and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but like, I know my friend
It will
personally.
be an accessibility
Yeah.
issue though. I have,
Yeah.
as an event planner
Yeah.
down at the university, I
Yeah.
have immense challenges getting ASL interpreters
Yeah.
for our events.
Yeah.
Like
And
it's a Rhode Island issue right now.
And I know my friend personally does not like to ask because that
Yeah.
she's being a bother and like, it's just, so she won't ask.
Is there a high school ASL class that could be
We don't have one, but I know that there have been some conversation and some students have presented to us senior projects and have done senior projects on it.
It does count as foreign language for college entrance.
For college?
Yeah.
I think we asked that question and I'm not sure.
I'm 100% positive, at least at the flagship university.
Yeah.
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 I think too, there's some policy stuff that could be put into place in the district, and then also there's some like recommendation stuff, so even things as simple as like if you're presenting to groups, like the size font on PowerPoints, making sure to have closed captions on, when you're speaking, like there's some just baseline stuff I don't think we do as practice in the district.
Right.
That could be either incorporated into some sort of recommendation or presented to the district just kind of as like a baseline or things to consider.
So we're talking about just school events, like not town.
Just school, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna share an experience that I had that I think it could cross over, and this was in the summer of 2015 when my daughter was participating. And it was, I think it was a town rec track program at the high school stadium. And whenever we had to enter, there was like, you had to kind of open the gate and squeeze through, and there was a chain around it. And on occasion, I would bring my son, who was in a wheelchair, but there was no way he could get in. And there also happened to be a dad of one of the student participants who couldn't get in. I can't tell you the hoops that I had to jump through. I ended up calling somebody from like the Building and Grounds Committee, and like even having to explain, and they said, well, it's a safety issue because then people will go in and they'll vandalize the field. And it was like, but this is like supposed to be an accessible event. So I use that example because I do think there's a lot that needs to be done. Like, and I think it's not just school-wide, I really do think it needs to be the town. This is a huge, I'm very, very passionate about this. When I applied to be on the DEI subcommittee, I said I really think that accessibility and belonging need to be included in that. I had the privilege of attending a National Disability Policy Seminar in Washington last month, and I think that was the first time in my life that I was in a room with about 800 other people, in which a good chunk of those folks had some type of a disability. And with all of the sessions I participated in, it was like, it was an eye-opener. I mean, we even got into discussions about how in order to recruit poll workers, like people to work at the polls, there really need to be accessibility policies because people with a disability may not be able to work a 12-hour shift.
Yep.
Never mind people who are like
It's a huge
typically able.
Yep.
And so anyway, there was a lot to like unpack. But I think there's a tremendous amount just in terms of just information and education, and things that I'm learning about as well that were not, you know, apparent to me before.
Thank you.
Mhm.
On a positive, my kids do that track program, and the gate's unlocked now, so maybe you got to.
I hope so.
It is, yeah, so.
And some
gonna give you
people
credit
weren't
for it.
like svelte enough to kind of like squeeze through that little, it was really kind of this.
Yeah.
You know, and not just, you know, visible disabilities, also, you know, the invisible ones and, you know, and more like, especially things that I think about are like field trips. And I know, like, just having reviewed the field trip policy, it does say like, you know, all children need to be able to attend the field trip or nobody can, but in practicality, like how well is that being executed? And, you know, when it comes down to it, is being able to attend and fully being able to, what's the word I'm looking for? Participate in the experience, are those two different things. And again, like I know this is off topic, but, well, it's kind of on topic, but like, you know, like the accessibility at like Whitford Middle School with that elementary, the elevator, like if there is a parent who is coming or a sibling or a relative, like who needs to use that elevator, like, you know, so just making sure that people are aware if you're coming, like those are like, or even to get to the elevator at Davisville, like how far you have to go to get to it, making sure that people who are coming to that building understand like what it'll take to get to different things. You know, using microphones, even if you think you're loud. kind of the same thing, like, are there best practices, what are we doing well, what could we do better?
Think of like events and that we've gone to, and if there's been any like info about anything like this.
Yeah, like what's an example of the events we're thinking about?
I'm just thinking of, like, more specifically, like, you know, I'm just thinking, like, when my kids were little, I don't know if they still do this, but like, they would go apple picking, right? And they would go on a hayride. So, like, how, are those types of things, like a bumpy, path out to the middle of the pumpkin picking? Like, are children who have mobility issues, who are in a wheelchair, like, are they able to get out to the path? Or if you have children who have, need, you know, to, if you have parents who are coming in and they, need to get down to the, stadium, I mean, in the gym, like, for parents and I've seen it, I know there's a ramp, like, and things
Yeah.
like that, but like, can they hear, can they see, like, just to make sure that it's set up in the most, accessible way possible. Again, like, the website, is it set up so that, you know, if you are, hard of hearing or hard of sight, is our website set up so that students and parents can use that, with, you know, is it adaptive for those types of things?
There's a government website, I forget what it's called offhand, but you can put your colors in or your website in, and it will tell you how accessible your fonts are and colors are with like color blindness and things like that. So we could do that. That would be a pretty fast check on that for the website. And then I'm just remembering being in high school and various assemblies. I think this would fall more under like invisible disability is a strong word, I guess, for this example, but like some assemblies that may like be triggering to some kids versus others, and you don't know until you're 20 minutes into it in the middle with 20 kids to this side and 20 to that side. So is there right now for assemblies like like this is what we're gonna be talking about, if you're not comfortable at this assembly, like are there other options for like kids to do, depending on the subject matter or whatever?
I would say like another example of that is school dances, you know, and thinking about like strobe lights at school dances, and I'm just thinking about the one that I just had to live through, and they did a great job. It was my own thing, but like loudness and not having a quiet space available or an alternate option that students could step out into, just things like that, perhaps.
Like sensory.
Yeah, some things like that, maybe.
Yeah.
Another thing might be, and this came up with your comments about the gate and trying to get through, but also in our discussions about the policy that we worked on previously, is size discrimination and accessibility for people of different sizes. Seats in the auditorium or something like that.
Or even something like, this might be a little beyond events, but if it's connected to an event, like size of shirt availability, things like that, like not having just XL, like having other options, et cetera.
So how much time are we devoting to this? Cause I have a million.
No, throw out.
I have a million things swirling. I think this is a great start when talking about events. I think a lot of it has to do with the culture. And, you know, you talked about school activities, when last year, when my son's group was going to the zoo, it was going to be like a roughly 9:30 to 2:30 field trip. And when I sent the permission slip back that he wouldn't be participating because he was incontinent, okay? For those of you who don't know, that means, you know, even though he was 15, he needed to have somebody change his diaper. And there was no place, I know there's no place at the zoo, because I know actually somebody who was trying to work with Roger Williams Park Zoo on getting a universal changing table there. So I was told that they could change him before he left, and then 2:30. Now, I didn't respond, but later I thought, are you gonna tell all those other kids they can't use the bathroom for 5 hours? So I think sometimes we might be well-intended, but one of the, I don't know if anybody here has ever seen the documentary Crip Camp? Okay, yay. I highly recommend it. That was, to me, was like a real introduction just to disability advocacy, and it was incredible. But there's a term the disability community call nothing about us without us. And so I think, you know, again, I don't know what, if people around the table have disabilities, but I think reaching out to people in the community, in the schools, to find out from them, because we could come up with all the things that we think of, and I think a lot of them have have a lot of value. But I think it's having those people at the table. And I don't really know I don't have anybody in the school anymore, so I don't know, but if there are people who, you know, some of the administrators or teachers could reach out to, just to hear their voices, including, and I would almost say, even especially the student self-advocates. That was a big part of this conference, by the way. Like, I had never been to like a conference where there were like young adults who, you know, were either using wheelchairs, they might have had Down syndrome, where they're advocating on the national level. And also, like, when we went to speak to our legislators for Advocacy Day, being there, and that was really, really powerful. So I'm not sure how we would go about doing that, but getting those people as, you know, part of the conversation.
No, we could invite them to come
Yeah.
to a meeting and speak for sure.
Like, including, like, even like your friend who needs the like, how do we make this work, you know?
It's a great idea.
With your point of the bathrooms, this is similar but mostly different. I was also thinking like field trips where there aren't gender neutral bathrooms and you're not comfortable going in line in a men's room or line in a women's room, like, are you gonna skip that field trip too because you're not gonna not go to the bathroom for 5 hours? So things like that too.
I saw it was in the holiday one, but there was a helpful list of questions, like I think that were prompts for the educators. And so maybe those are things for if we end up doing some sort of thing that you could write, like, you know, like, is the place that you're going on the field trip, you know, do they have this? Do they have this?
Yeah.
Like, make sure to look into this, you know, are they, you know, going off of what you all are saying, like, it could be prompts, you know, or guidance on just being able to assess an event or a situation that you might be bringing students into, to make sure that there's a good base so that people don't accidentally forget and then end up in a situation like what you're talking about. Because you knew about the zoo, but like, if you didn't know and assumed it was gonna be fine, and then that would, you know, the administration should be assessing those things, I think, like from a global perspective, to not put it on the parents to just have to know.
Absolutely.
In general, is this like a case by case basis? Like, what happens if a student has some sort of physical disability and is day to day okay in the routine of school, but will need extra support on a field trip or something? Like, does somebody else come with, or like, how does that work, or is it case by case, IEP by IEP?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I know for our students with diabetes, we always have to take a nurse with us. if
Okay.
We have them.
Oh, cool, okay.
I'm not sure outside of
Some of
that.
the students have paras
Yes.
also, yeah.
Another thing too, I was just looking at the document that you provided, Jen, when it's talking about accessible parking, like obviously if we're doing an event at the school buildings, we have some accessible parking by law, but where your event is in comparison to that accessible parking, I think is something people could consider, we could put some guidance on. Because if you do something at the high school, like, and it's not near where the accessible parking is, like thinking that through and like, you know, thinking of those options to do temporary accessible parking or, you know, something like that. I'm thinking about like the robotics thing that they do is on the, like, the B side, is that right? Where's that?
The B doors.
B
yeah.
doors, yes, okay, I'm getting there. So like, you know, like, I don't know what the parking situation is over there versus on the gym side, you know, that sort of thing might be something that would be more event specific, that wouldn't be being implied with the law, because our building has it, but not.
You know, Mary has
Yeah.
driven me through the parking lot, not here, but in other places, and showed me, like,
Yeah.
she's giving me a great tutorial, because I,
It's
like,
wild, the
Yes.
laws are not consistent with like common sense or ease.
I don't, to be
Yeah.
honest, and to be like fair, most people, if you don't have a physical disability, it's just not on your radar.
Yeah.
It's been on my radar for a long time, and it's like instinctive. I had an appointment at one of the hospitals this morning, and there were parking spots there that said they had the handicap logo, and there were 2 spots next to each other.
Yeah,
No access aisle, and I'm thinking, this is a hospital, like, did somebody, so I don't know, there's a certain level of frustration, with that, like, that to me is inexcusable.
Yeah.
But there are definitely guidelines about that, like, and if you can only have one spot, it needs to be van accessible and needs to have this size access aisle, so there's definitely like guidelines
Yep.
out there.
The tricky part
to
is
follow.
though, is if you have a pre-existing thing,
Mhm.
when you update that thing, you have to make sure it's in compliance. But if you,
It's grandfathered.
yeah, some of them get like restrooms are a big example of that. Like that, restrooms can technically be out of compliance until you touch them, and then you have to make sure they're in compliance. And so that's something that, you know, the district could look into as well. Cause like we might be legally in compliance, but out of compliance with the laws, if that makes sense.
What Jen said earlier too, it struck me, the distance to the elevator at Davisville, because we just had our concert last week, we had our spring concert, and there was an elderly man with a cane who there happened to be a table in the hallway, and he had to stop and rest on the way walking down there, and he just had a seat at the table for a while and rested there.
I had never, like, been, when we did the tour, when we were doing the bond, and like, I didn't realize where the elevator was, cause I had only ever been like in the gym, and I was like, wow, like, just thinking, like, being on crutches and walking all the way, that's far, like.
And we could easily put something out in the invitation to families that say, if there's accessible or closer spots will be made available for those who need them around the back of the
Come
gym.
in the back building, yeah.
I think that's a general question I have, is that, and it doesn't seem to be common practice when announcing school events that if you need reasonable accommodation, please
Yeah.
contact blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, that would be a simple, I mean, I just looked at the
That's an easy fix, I
Yeah,
would think.
I re-
concert announcement,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know, little things like that, just
Yeah.
one liner
Yeah.
from the teacher.
I think to your point too, with kindergartners, having kindergartners, they do, like, just the example that came to mind is like STEM night at the high school, where you make Valentines or you make snowmen or whatever. And I have no idea where I'm going in the high school, and it's huge, cause I have a kindergartner. And I don't need a handicapped spot, but I don't know where I'm going, so I just follow the big line of cars where they're parked and assume that's where I'm going, but I have no idea car, walking, or where I'm going, so having like even like the buckets with the handicap thing, so like this is closer to where the door is that you're going, so that you're not just wandering aimlessly, would be helpful.
I don't have it in front of me, because I think I did it on my husband's computer. But I had presented remarks to the school committee, the building subcommittee, when they were looking at potentially building the new middle school. And I can go back and try to find that, but a lot of that had to do with that, like something can be ADA compliant, but is it also disability friendly? Like to David's point, this, and not just for students, and I specifically remember including that in the remarks. It would benefit not only students, but it could be staff who have a disability, or family coming for an event. And so that they don't have to figure out like where to park. So I'll try to see if I can find that, because I I was just kind of going through my head, like, kind of a walkthrough DMS, starting with I think there's only one handicap accessible spot out in front of the school by the curb, so, but I know that's a whole other issue.
No, that would be great, and I think your idea of having, people from our community come share their experiences, to help inform where we're going with this is a good one, so, Erin's on the CLAC, so maybe she can help coordinate that. She's ignoring me.
No, I'm not. Yes, I mean, there's also, I was thinking of the multiple ways that we
Yeah.
could get some information from folks. Because also we don't always know, like, if, for going back to your field trip example, like, we don't know when somebody says no, like, why they said no. And, you know, unless they wrote it in or whatever, but then we also, are we collecting that data anywhere? Are we assessing themes, you know, things like that,
Right.
you know,
Right.
good data. The other thing I was thinking about for events with accessibility is thinking about, like, language accessibility. Not assuming that all of our family and supporters speak English, and that, you know, if you're inviting the community in or your family's in, like, what could you do to assist them as well? Like, that's kind of another piece of the events part of it, that could help us be a more inclusive community, so something else to think about.
Does the district utilize, I don't know if this is used only in like medical settings, there is a program called Language Line that's like a virtual like interpreter, you know, on the screen, and they have like, you put in the request for the language. I'm thinking like in terms of meetings, like, I don't know, IEP meetings and things like that, where the parents may not speak English.
What
Does
did you
the
say it
district-
was called, language?
It's called Language Line.
I'm gonna guess no, but
No.
It's used in a medical setting, so like
Yeah,
I
I've
was
seen it.
doing this, like a
I've used it,
clinical
but-
observation in a practice where parents throughout the day spoke different languages. And so they would have the laptop on, or maybe it was more like an iPad, and it was on wheels, and they would bring it into the room and say, okay, we have like the, you know, interpreter from whatever. Like they said, challenging one is like when they actually have like sometimes interpreters from like the home, like say in China. So you have to schedule those appointments so that they're not like calling them up at like 2 o'clock in the morning type of. So I don't know if it's like also geared toward educational settings as well, but you can, there are like multiple languages that are on there.
If you go on the MLL, like, department for the, ride, there is a list of interpreters. It's my understanding that the school has to pay for the interpreter, like the
Translator.
the translator. They're not gonna, like, the state's not gonna provide, that's, at least in Jamestown, I've come across this, so the school had to pay for it, so, so it's like it could be a budget thing, but,
No, I think.
yeah, but
that's
there is a,
yeah.
on the on RIDE and the MLL section, there's also a list of translation services that are local. So, just to keep in mind.
I can't get the story of the student out of my head who has to translate for their family, for the conversations at the school about their sibling. So I think being able to provide the translator is.
And even like if for an event, like if, you know, like having a QR code, like if you're printing a program, having a QR code that could bring you to it in a different language, or printing one side in English and one side in Spanish, or, you know, whatever, you know, like, it doesn't have to be the entire event, that'd be great, but like, you know, moving steps forward to just moving beyond the assumption that it's English or bust energy, for events at least.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions on this part? Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah,
Did you
motion now.
adjourn? Motion to adjourn? Jen, did you adjourn?
No, she's doing it.
Can I make a can I get a second? All in favor?
So she's turning that off right now.
She would have forgotten.
We will all get like, we will all get